We are watching and I hope this is wrong, but it's sort of like, I mean, honestly, it is as if we were watching people being pushed off the side of a building in slow motion, and you're sitting there, you're watching the pushing, and you know that gravity exists, and you're still like, well, maybe there'll be a big gust of wind, or maybe, like the laws of physics will be suspended, but you know that that's not actually the case. And that's what we're watching right now as the administration promotes the loosening of the way that we have been organizing ourselves to deal with the coronavirus. There's 2 or 3 reasons why this is happening. They are all interrelated. One is the president wants to project that they've handled this, and he thinks that the deaths of 2,000 to 3,000 Americans for months is either something that people won't notice or won't be as relevant in the states. I mean, I'm convinced they've probably done a breakdown in in the White House, and they're looking at this and they're going like, okay, Georgia might be a problem, but not necessarily with our voters. And, Nebraska might be a problem, but not with our voters because they're not working in the meat processing plants. They're just own the plants. I mean, I'm quite convinced that someone has come to him with this type of breakdown.
I doubt that for a second.
That it's like, it might be like 51-50, but it's like a toss up. But if we don't do this, we're definitely going to lose. So it's worth the try. And that's what they're doing. And I think that's what's happening in terms of like what is pushing the White House, because a lot of the states that are supportive of the president are far less dense. And obviously the stay-at-home orders are to create less density, right? I mean, at least in terms of like where people gather. In a micro level, the stay-at-home order is to create less density. And there are a lot of states where it's just not that dense. There's a lot of areas of the country where it's very rural. And that, I think, is the idea out of the White House. And then
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
In terms of the Republican states, I mean, all you need to do is look at Ohio for a perfect example of this. And, we've heard the governor of Iowa say something to this as well. But in Ohio, they have begun to loosen things. They have set up a website for employees to report on businesses who are not following the Ohio's, health guidelines or CDC health guidelines. No, that's not what it's for. It's a website where you can report COVID-19 quits or refusals of workers to work because it's too dangerous for them to work there, so that these people can be denied unemployment insurance efficiently. That's what's going on here. The moral hazard, and that's in quotes, of people deciding that in the midst of a pandemic, they don't feel comfortable risking their lives to work at the hair salon, basically is driving, and it's not just the moral hazard, right? It's also they don't want to pay the unemployment.
Yeah.
And we should make it clear that DeWine now has announced today massive cuts to education and public services there, and is refusing to spend money from the rainy day fund. Contemplate this.
This would be a rainy day.
What
my
else would
estimation.
be a rainy day except for we're in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic and receiving an unprecedented shock to our economy? No, because he wants the money there so that you don't have to justify, tax cuts for wealthy people. I mean, that's what's going on here. And
I mean, look, there's an opportunity here to, and they see it very clearly, for another, I mean, not only another concentration of wealth and resources, which we saw in the bailout, but another degrading of working standards generally. So, of course, I mean, I listened to Nouriel Roubini yesterday on Bloomberg, and, he was the guy who first got some recognition for predicting the recession. And I mean, the 2008 financial crisis. And I mean, he basically, I mean, he's predicting the worst of all worlds, because he's like, there's enough being injected into the economy that you could see basically like a stagflation with degraded work standards across the board.
And this is the point, we heard a lot about during the Democratic campaign about structural reform and people not wanting structural change. And, we're getting it.
Yeah,
what the Republicans are doing are creating structural changes to our economy and to our social safety net and to the way our society works. And supposedly, the Democrats are really going to hand it to them this time, but it could very well be late because too late. Because I don't know what it is that the Democrats don't have the ability, it seems, to basically say Republicans own this, and therefore we're going to go for stuff that we think is unique in terms of what we were to advocate for. They own this. Most of them believe you spend money, or the government needs to spend money to hire people when they're in office, we should say. They don't believe it when a Democrat's in office, but when they're in office, they know the laws of economics, and that the Democrats should have been leveraging this throughout that period of time. The only thing that could save the Democrats, and frankly, the rest of us, is if things get so clearly bad enough and then the Democrats have the opportunity to leverage that. I don't know that they will do it at that time, but
that's how they always win. I mean, I keep repeating this, but they win in Republican abject, massive failure, or if they have an exceptionally charismatic figurehead on a presidential ticket.
Well, I'm not even talking about the election. I'm talking about the enormous amount of money that's going out the door and where.
I don't even.
I'm talking legislative.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. not to be too cynical, but we have to see. I mean, what's also disturbing to me is that you don't even have, like in the UK, you have a lot of people at least attempting to say, we want to keep doing this third way center left model. And here's what that looks like in 2020. I don't agree with those prescriptions at all, but you have a thought process going on. I don't see any thought process on any level. I don't see a thought process on how to hold Republicans accountable. I don't see an alternative to Sanders to a Sanders agenda. I basically see we'll build a little bit off of Obama, and then we'll keep our heads down.
I just think it's completely like, let's just make sure that we're not part of this equation.
But of course they are. I mean,
well, of course,
I mean, and that is an unhelpful contempt for the electorate in that case, because that's obvious to people.
I mean, we can talk about the election in a bit. I am talking about right now.
Do you think they'll get another bite at the apple, though?
What's that?
Do you think they'll get another bite at the apple legislatively?
Oh, I think it's impossible to imagine that there's not going to be another bailout. I mean,
sure. But
I think it's impossible to imagine.
But what would they have to do? I mean, just within the
they
realm.
need to go and they'll pass legislation in the House.
Right.
And what they need to do is go about 50% bigger on everything that they want. And they basically need to say, and maybe, if anything, shortchange the obvious stuff that everybody wants, so that the Senate has to force them to raise those numbers that everybody wants, and they get the numbers that they want, including, I would also put into that voter protection.
I would assume that enough. I mean, one is, I do think, obviously Pelosi personally is not there on a lot of policy, but there must be, just looking at it, trying to come up with an actual reason here of how they've conducted themselves. There must be enough members of the Democratic House caucus that don't want those bigger, they don't want to do it. They don't want additional protections, additional funding. I mean,
I don't think there was the opportunity. I just don't think there was the opportunity to pass that bill. And I think that was a question of leadership. Yeah, because I think the House just, decided not to do it that way, to just cede to the Senate. And I suspect that's because Chuck Schumer is, beside himself with how well he thinks he did on remember, they were bragging, no money can go to the Trump family. Like, that's a big accomplishment. I mean, I don't know that we can tell what the dynamic is between those two. But I've been hearing reporting that Chuck Schumer was so satisfied with what happened with the CARES Act in the Senate that he put the kibosh on the House, bringing their own thing. Now, I think Nancy Pelosi was probably more than happy not to do much, but just a reminder, today's